Nigeria literally survives on its crude and all its derivatives. But the ravaging floods threaten oil and gas production in the Niger Delta region. How devastating will the effect be on you and I listening to the show right now? Are Nigerian governors really interfering with the House of Assemblies, with their House of Assemblies, thereby causing a bit of a delay when it comes to votes for the celebrated constitutional amendment bill? Are 4 bills enough to actually stand against the amendment of the 1999 constitution that almost everyone has been talking about really needs some form of amendment? Well, we will talk about these issues on the show this evening, and it's my cue to welcome you to another bumper package of the Newsroom, brought to you by the Newsroom of Nigeria Info, Wazobia and Cool FM. My name is Ufuoma Egbamuno. It's a pleasure to be here. Sadly, unfortunately, the Shakumaku or Shakuma, whatever he says, Aghogho, my partner in crime, is not on the show today. But that doesn't mean we will not give you a wonderful, wonderful show. Yes, we hope to. Remember, we are streaming the show on Facebook, Nigeria Info 993, and on YouTube, Nigeria Info 993. So you can as well take a listen or watch us from wherever you are. Quickly, without much ado about nothing, let's get into the thick of the action. Let's start with the very first topic on today's show, which has to do with the devastating floods we've had over the last set of weeks. Well, I can tell you for a fact that there's been reported cases of snake bites in some parts of Nigeria. It feels like human beings are now battling with reptiles all across the country. As if that's not enough, we also have had a report from UNESCO, or rather, the United Nations Children's Fund. I've forgotten my, in primary school, there used to be emergency somewhere, but, it's United Nations Children's Fund, that's UNICEF. They brought out a report last week, Friday, stating that over 1.5 million Nigerians or Nigerian children are at risk as a result of the devastating floods. That's really terrible. But today on the show, we're not going to be looking at all of the things I just mentioned. Hopefully, in the course of the week, we'll be talking about all of that. Today, we're going to look at how the floods are actually affecting our oil and gas sector. Remember, I stated at the start of the show that Nigeria literally survives on it. Whatever monies we make, a chunk of the monies we'll make come from the oil and gas sector. And if there's an emergency shutdown as a result of the flooding in the states like Rivers, Delta, Bayelsa, and some other areas in the Niger Delta region, there's a huge possibility this could affect the country. Well, we have a former president of the Ijaw Youth Council. He is also a former commissioner in Bayelsa State. Presently, he is a special advisor to the interim administrator of the Niger Delta Development Commission. It is my pleasure to welcome Udengs Eradiri to the newsroom. He's joining us via Zoom. A very good evening to you, sir. I hope you can hear me. Is your mic... Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Mr. Eradiri. Welcome to the newsroom on Nigeria Info.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to share knowledge about what's happening in our country today. I appreciate what you guys do.
By the way, let me even start before I get into the... You're in Bayelsa right now as you speak, right?
Well, I left Bayelsa yesterday to Port Harcourt, so I'm actually in Port Harcourt. But I have first-hand experience with what has been happening with respect to the flood.
Could you just share that with us in like 30 seconds or a minute?
Okay. I actually left last Thursday, so I spent about 10 days in Yenegua because I was cut off. So I had to come through the difficulties that the people face. In 2012, I was in the flood. I experienced it. And you know that the projection is that after every 10 years, you have the flood as devastating as it was in 2012. So I actually was moving in on Thursday, which was the last time that the road was accessible. And on my way, I actually participated in saving lives. As I was passing, I heard somebody a cry for help. And it was so faint that I had to ask my drivers to stop. And then we listened carefully and found that somebody was calling from inside the forest.
Wow.
So I now asked the escorts to flash the light into the bush because it was already dark. That's how we spotted somebody clinging to a tree. Wow. Because the floods had washed him into the bush. So we had to get a boat from the adjoining community. We tied ropes on them. A naval officer decided to go on that boat. And by the time he got close to where he was to reach out to this guy, the boat capsized. And then we started struggling to save the naval guys alive because of the pressure of getting distress calls, going to places to save people. Because I own a jet ski, so it was easy for me to
move around,
to go into the entire flooded area to save lives. But you see, the sad part is that we couldn't find NEMA on site. As at yesterday, when I was coming back, I only saw soldiers who were at the other axis of it with boats that the military had brought in to ferry people. Because as we speak, you cannot commute between Rivers and Bayelsa or Delta. At the Patani axis,
the East-West road
completely cut off. Yes, the East-West road is completely cut off. You have to enter big trucks to get to a point, and you disembark and then board boats to cross over to the other side where transporters are also waiting to pick you to your next destination. That's actually how I came. But you know, the sad part is that I was carrying out an assessment of the road and discovered that if only leaders went to that place, we wouldn't have spent up to 100 million, would have fixed the bad spots. I recorded it. I just prepared the report. We
will definitely need to get those videos from you if you do not mind.
Yes, I will send them immediately after to you.
All right.
And then prepare the report to the minister. Coincidentally, I had written on the 5th of September, I had called the attention of the minister of Niger Delta to the fact that the floods will be devastating this year and that we need to take action. And so those processes are in place now, expecting that NEMA
and other agencies will deal with it.
Yes, we'll deal with it. But so far,
oh dear, the network. Always a problem. Hello, Mr. Odeng. Oh,
look, this flood is a global phenomenon. So the difference is that leaders educate their people. They conscientize everybody about the dangers ahead. They evacuate the weak and the elderly. And then when the disaster eventually comes, they are hands-on to deal with the issues. And so that's the difference. So if you hear people saying, these things, it happens. When I was commissioner for environment, a month to the flood time, I had already cleared all the inlets and outlets of water. The canals were cleaned up, and the effects were minimal. But say, even when Kogi, because the flood pattern is that it starts in the north, Bauchi, Kogi, Taraba, and states like that. Then Kogi is like the yardstick to measure how the flood will
look like
perform. So I haven't seen Kogi for over 3 weeks with all the devastation. We all know that once it starts receding from Kogi State, it will now pour into Bayelsa before it goes to the ocean. So nobody needs to tell you that you should be prepared.
All right, quickly, Mr. Radiri, let's talk about how all of this is now affecting oil production. Could you just give us an insight?
Okay, yesterday when I was coming, I saw some Shell personnel on the road, and I was wondering what they were doing on that lonely road that no vehicles can ply on right now. But they told me they were going to check some of their oil facilities, because these oil sectors, you send people every day to go and check valves, take readings and things like that. All of that cannot happen because the waters have completely submerged most of the oil installations. And those also forget that in recent times, we have had this problem of vandalization, where most of the pipelines have been compromised by the activities of community and vandals.
Yeah.
And then which led to the shutting down force majeure from the major oil companies. So in order for you to go back to start production, you need to go and ensure that those areas that were tampered with are all taken care of before you can start your pumping. So that didn't happen. And so it's actually affecting the country in a very negative manner. Even though the pipes were not destroyed by the community vandals, there still would have been some problems, because you need that maintenance work to be done regularly on those facilities in order for the oil to be flowing unfettered. So the flood itself have come with a lot of damage to both lives and as well as economic activities of the country, because oil installations are submerged. But let me also state that this is not happening in the entire Niger Delta.
Okay.
It is only those states that are around the banks of the Niger, the River Benue and the Nile River.
So River Niger, you mean?
It's tributaries. So you see, most part of about 90% of Bayelsa, because the areas where you have salt water do not flood. Areas like the Brass local government, part of Ogbia, those areas is salt water. In River State, you have just about 2 local governments. The Aouda East and West local governments, and then are around the banks of the Orashi River and things like that.
The Omoko axis too.
Other part,
the Omoko axis too. Oboh, Egbema.
The Omok axis, the Imo axis.
Uguta.
And then part of, yes. Then Delta, you are looking at the Patani, Bomadi local governments, and then a few other areas in the Ugeli and places like that. There are other parts of the state where it's more of salt water, things are happening normally. So it's only those communities that are within the banks of the Niger, Benue, and the Nile that are actually affected.
So before all of these floods, we already had a pending issue, where we had shortages in our oil production as a result of vandalism, and all of those economic sabotage. Now the floods have added to it. Could you give us an insight on the kind of implications this could have for Nigeria's economy?
Well, yes, Nigeria's economy have actually been battered by unseriousness on the part of leadership, as well as community vandalization. And the vandalization is as a result of years of neglect, where the people have decided that since everything is in the pipeline, let's go and get it in the pipeline. But I think that the flood shouldn't be much of an excuse. A country that is ready to make progress would have been prepared before now to deal with the challenges that come with this flood. Every Nigerian knows that at a particular time of the year, starting from June, the banks of the waterways will begin to increase. And because of indiscipline on the part of leadership as well, because the waterways are silted. They started a project of dredging the River Niger to Baro and Onitsha. But at the end of the day, corruption and unseriousness led Nigeria not able to see that project through. Otherwise, if you go to places like Egypt that are on the same water line, year in, year out, they are able to control the effects of flooding, because the waterways serve as an economic hub to every nation. So you need to do maintenance work on it, because we didn't do. All our waterways are silted. Look, let me tell you, some parts, before you get to Onitsha, if you are going up from Bayelsa, before you get to Onitsha, there are areas on this big river that you see that you can just walk across because of the quantum of sand, because of lack of dredging. So it is the part on seriousness on the part of leadership that have allowed us leave these waterways to be so silted that the water now, when it is excess, do not have a pathway to go begin to flood
into town.
So if you are talking about economic losses today, we should remember that it is the way we lie our bed, that the way we prepare our bed, that we lie on it. If we know, everybody knows that there's a yearly flooding and it comes with associated disruption of our economy, then we'll be prepared by taking the right actions. Unfortunately, leaders don't learn, and I don't see them learning going forward.
Okay, quickly, as we try to wrap up this conversation because we have another issue to deal with on the show. Let's compare the 2012 floods, and the effects and what we have presently. Which do you think is more?
This one, because there's no basis for comparison. In 2012, I was going to Benin. I left for Benin. 2 days later, I was coming back. I couldn't cross from Patani. I had to go through Onitsha. Passing through Onitsha, when I got to the Kwale axis, we had to practically push my Tundra the Tundra vehicle, which was a very high vehicle, to cross over that area. So I experienced it coming back. The same thing this year, I went in because I want to experience it and also be part of the history. So I can tell you can imagine the loss of wildlife. That is the most painful part of it, because if you come and see what is happening, the entire wildlife in that area is lost. They are all flooded. You see them floating dead, snakes and things like that. Even snakes that are amphibious animals, they die as a result of the effects of the flood.
Plus food crops and farm produce.
Farm produce, yeah. You can imagine the economic loss if you go to the east-west road, finding out that you can't move from one end to the other, and you see trucks all lined up on both sides of the lane, waiting for this flood for the next 3 weeks for it to recede before they move on. So, but if we had serious leadership, the military have these bridges that they use for war. They could have brought it, because this is a national security threat. And I think that we need to be treating them in such manner. 2022 flood clearly is far more than what happened in 2012.
All right, Mr. Udengs Eradri, thank you very much for joining us on the newsroom. Hopefully, we'll get you on the show subsequently to talk more on this issue. We truly appreciate your taking your time to join us.
Thank you, and I will forward you the videos.
We would appreciate it. Thank you very much. That was, of course, a former president of the Joy Youth Council and a former commissioner in Bayelsa State, who is presently a special advisor to the interim administrator of the Niger Delta Development Commission, Udengs Eradiri, giving us a first-hand experience of what the devastating floods have looked like out there in Bayelsa and River State. Well, that's my cue to move on now to topic 2 on the show this evening. In case you just joined us, this is 99.3 Nigeria Info. My name is Ufuoma Egbamuno. The show is called The Newsroom, and on the show we take a look at some of the big topical issues from the past week. Well, as far back as Thursday, I did tell my colleagues who are in charge of the production, Emmanuel Onwoka and then Precious Okon, that we really need to talk about this particular issue, because part of our job here, is to set the agenda and have some of these topical issues out there so that people can understand. A couple of months ago, a lot of us, myself included, were celebrating some of the constitutional amendments as carried out by the National Assembly. We've complained a lot about how faulty the 1999 Constitution actually is. Well, they didn't do all, but at least some big issues, came under conversations, and the National Assembly passed those bills and, of course, transmitted it to the 36 House of Assemblies for harmonization. Well, I can tell you for a fact that only 11 state assemblies have considered and voted on the 44 constitutional amendment bills. The states are Abia, Akwa Ibom, Anambra, Delta, Edo, Kaduna, Katsina, Kogi, Lagos, Ogun, and Osun states. 25 other states have failed to consider the bills, and these states have threatened that they will not take any action on the bills unless the National Assembly adds 4 more constitutional amendment bills to it. Now, the 4 bills these states are looking at are to establish state police, to establish state judicial council, to streamline the procedure for removing presiding officers of the state houses of assembly, and to institutionalize legislative bureaucracy in the constitution. Well, we had the Deputy Senate President Ufuoma Aghogho last week in the news, vehemently complaining that Nigerians need to reach out to their state legislators, to get them on board to get this thing sorted out. He believes that some state governors are actually interfering in the affairs of the state house of assemblies and turning these lawmakers into puppets for their selfish reason. Well, we did try to get 2 legislators on the show today. Sadly, one of them could not make it, but we have a legislator joining us on the show from Cross River State, who is the former Speaker of the Cross River State House of Assembly. Honorable John Gwalebo is on the show this evening. A very good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
All right, thank you.
All right, welcome to the newsroom. Very quickly, it would have been great if we actually had you on video, but let me ask you, as a former leader of the House of Assembly, what are your thoughts on this? Let me call it a standoff, so to speak, between the National Assembly and some state assemblies. What's your thought on what's actually going on right now?
Well, I think there are standard, typical issues which are peculiar to the legislative ecosystem in the state level. The first is the issue of timing. By timing, I mean that I feel that the National Assembly introduces amendment too late. Politics has come in. A lot of the House of Assembly members are not going back. They don't have a ticket to run second or third term elections, and most of them are not interested. I was speaker, and I can tell you for free that once you're done with the party primaries, it is difficult to get a quorum in the House of Assembly. First, so the timing is very wrong. The second issue is that the House of Assemblies at the state level are not independent in the sense that their intellectual autonomy is tied to the legislature, to the executive. In this case, the governor. In which cases the House of Assembly plays the politics of the governor at every given point in time. And the reason is very obvious. Issues about their allowances, issues about their overhead, their constituency votes and all of that tied to the executive. And so in most cases, only very few House of Assembly are able to define that boundary of autonomy and then implement it against the wish of the executive. So in most cases, what you find is that the governors are not in support of that amendment, and because of that, the House of Assembly members will follow. They call us rubber stamp then, and I think that issue is still there. So that is another issue. The third aspect of it is that sometimes some of the issues that you raise about constitutional amendment, you need a lot of education, enlightenment, conferences and seminars with the House of Assembly members to bring them up to date. Most members of the House of Assembly don't have enough capacity to even understand some of the issues in the constitutional amendment.
True.
And so by the time you take them to that point, you need a lot of step down in terms of education and all of that. So you virtually have to lobby their interest in an issue as serious as a constitutional amendment in the country. And so most times, the issue you're raising has no direct benefit to them. And then most House of Assembly members are like councillors. Once they can't benefit from it, they virtually may not even understand what the issues are. So those are some of the challenges that you have. In my time, I was the chairman of the Speakers Forum on the constitutional amendment. And I remember I was in charge of the Not Too Young to Run bill. I remember that the first thing we did was to even organize ourselves into a catchment group by senatorial district. And we went ahead to educate our colleagues across the State House of Assembly. We were able to get 29 states to accept that bill and a lot of other issues. Even though they rejected our own autonomy, Most of the states rejected our own autonomy, but voted for the not to run bill. So it is a very difficult process, and I believe that the National Assembly should understand this for the purpose of the future.
All right. So, basically, from what I hear, from you're basically, accepting what the Deputy Senate President, said, that state governors, are more or less influencing what's currently going on in the state. And I also agree with you when you talked about the fact that for most of these state legislators, if it really doesn't concern them or is beneficial to them, they go with the man who cares attitude. But there's one particular amendment, that really concerns me, and I'm sure concerns a lot of Nigerians. It has to do with unbundling the power sector. I would think that everybody in Nigeria is concerned about issues in the power sector. We not get light. Let me say it in the local parlance, how we say it. Light no day. So almost everybody is dealing with buying petrol or diesel, or if you are rich enough, like Emmanuel Onwuka, my producer, buying inverters in your houses. Should that not be a problem that concerns these state legislators, sir?
It should have been, but you need to distinguish between the situation analysis as it is and as it ought to be. As it is now, you find that in the long time, the issue of power has been designed in such a way and manner that state assembly hardly talk about energy and power in the country. Even as Speaker of the House of Assembly, I only had a motion relating to disco and power distribution in the South and in Cross River State once in 4 years. So what has happened is that in terms of the subject matter of deliberation within the floor of the House of Assembly, the issue of power is not one that members are very versed about. They are not knowledgeable about it. They don't, in the course of the training as legislators, they don't train them on that aspect. They consider it to be a matter that is under the exclusive list, even though it's on the concurrent list. So you're going to have that first issue with respect to the members understanding the concept of power and the relevance to the situation of their society. The second issue is that, yes, I agree, it's an issue that touches on a lot of our businesses in the society, and even the members themselves ordinarily should know that this is such a critical issue, like air. But the problem is that you need a society, you need civil societies, you need lobby groups to be able to push this to the end. Because I remember in my time, the issue of not too young to run and the issue of local government autonomy, we were forced to pass yes because we had pressures from NGOs and their support groups. So I believe that this is an aspect of legislative lobby that NGOs to deal with. Once there's a protest on the floor of the House of Assembly, banners before the House of Assembly, and they insist that we want this item because the serious House of Assembly will bring it to the table. The other issue is that, for members of the House of Assembly, the Assembly is the House of Assembly is such a difficult situation because the way...
Hello?
The concurrent list has been very empty. The House of Assembly members have been on intellectual sabbatical for a long time. That means that you meet sometimes in the vote and proceeding of the House, in the order paper, you find virtually nothing to argue about. So these members have been on sabbatical. And so I believe that the National Assembly and the NGO support groups, international organizations who work on the legislature should take this up as a subject matter of engagement so that the next set of legislatures that will come will lead a lot of education to bring up to speed. I believe that the National Institute of Legislative Studies has a lot of work to do to bring the members up to speed.
Okay, you did mention something earlier. You talked about the fact that, which is quite obvious, that politics are setting, so almost everybody is on autopilot, mode. Does this mean that, give or take, we might need to wait after elections before any of these constitutional amendments can actually be done?
There are two things. For me, there are two ways to deal with the issue. First is that the National Assembly must immediately convene conferences, seminars within the various geopolitical zones to enlighten and educate the members of the urgency to pass this bill. Now, what happened in the past that we'll have all our National Assembly members, for instance, now the Deputy Senate President is the highest placed person in the South. So that meeting in the Southeast, South, and Southwest will take responsibility and educate our members. Identify those states that have not passed the bill, educate them on the urgency of that. He has that kind of respect and honor, and that can be dealt with. Even the Speaker of the House of Reps has a role to play. If he moves into and bringing those states in the Southwest that have not passed, goes to the Southeast, that can be achieved. That's one. The second aspect is that even after the election is over, you are going to face a worst case scenario because most of the members who have tickets may not win their elections. And if they don't win their election, they will lose more interest in the matter. So I believe that the proper time to deal with that matter is now. It takes 2 or 3 sittings to pass that amendment. It's not a big deal. Once you have your own public debate, and then it's in the affirmative, you will move to the end. Now, in my time, we had some of the public debates that the House, our opinion was that we were not going to pass that amendment. But after the public debate, we faced a lot of pressure. And people insisted that we are going to have a recall. They even threatened some of my colleagues that we're going to recall if we don't pass ICE in favor of that bill. That was local government autonomy, for instance. And that's for the members. Because you see now, you're talking about the same constituents that will elect you in your election, insisting that you must pass this bill before that period. That pressure is important. If that happens, that bill can be passed before December. And then you don't need to wait after the election. It's going to be worse after the election. Most of the members who already have tickets will not come back. And then you're going to have that issue with the House of Assembly being able to reconvene at that point in time.
Okay, let's look at a worst case scenario. Let's say for the purpose of this conversation, it doesn't happen. We don't get these members, to vote on this at the end of the expiration of, this dispensation. Speak to me like I don't understand it. Like in one corner of Nigeria, listening to Nigeria Info right now, and I don't understand how legislative processes work. Will the National Assembly need to vote on this constitutional amendment again and transmit it to the state assemblies, or the next set of lawmakers can just start from where it was stopped now?
It's a different republic, so to say, a different assembly. So the next assembly will need to vote on the bill all over again if it's not passed. That's the reason why the urgency is like call it in law, starting de novo. You have to start all over again because this legislative session has introduced that item, and then in terms of their votes and proceedings and in terms of their procedure, it is provided. Once that is not provided, all the processes that have taken place will expire by a function of time and law. So you need to start all over again. The new House of National Assembly, the new Senate President, the new Speaker of House of Reps will need to introduce that item all over again. Wow.
Okay, quickly as we wrap up, what will be the implication for the average Nigerian listening to the show right now who wants all of these amendments done to the Constitution? What will be the implication for them if, this stalemate continues and we don't cross the line?
I think that Nigerians, the ordinary Nigerians on the street, the citizens, constituents, voters, and then the members of our various constituencies have a role to play, and that role is that first of all we can introduce legislative lobby. I just gave you an instance of what happened during my tenure as Speaker. We didn't want to take the local government autonomy. We didn't want to take the autonomy of the House of Assembly, and then we were forced. There was a motion that we were forced to have a public hearing on that matter, and it was attended. And then they passed a resolution. They forced us to take a resolution at that public hearing that they want that item passed. Otherwise, they are going to recall any member who doesn't pass it. And because of that, we were forced to take it. Now, what they have, the votes are coming in. People are still going to ask for their votes and all of that. I think the constituents and citizens from those states should go to the House of Assembly and demand that this matter is taken as a matter of urgency, state or national importance. That can be achieved. We need CSO support groups. I have this budget IT. It's a budget IT organization that took that responsibility in Cross River State then, and we're forced to reconvene. We had already gone on recess. We're forced to reconvene and pass that bill. So Nigerians have a role to play
on that.
If they don't, yes, on that, because the same politicians legislators are coming to ask you for their votes. They are still coming to campaign. What are they coming to tell you? If some of the bills that would affect your life, that can change your life now, they can't even take it because of politics. You have to force them to go back to the drawing board.
All right. Absolutely enjoyed speaking to you, Honorable John Gal. Thank you very much for joining us on the newsroom this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, that was, of course, former Speaker of the Cross River State House of Assembly, enlightening us. Oh my goodness, almost bit my tongue there. On some of these processes and what needs to be done. It's quite a dire situation, and we will try as much as possible on Nigeria Info to keep talking about this issue, because of course I want the power situation in Nigeria solved. And part of the ways to solve it is to get this constitutional amendment done. Well, that's the show today. Thank you very much for joining us. Next week, Monday, from 15 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock, if Yvonne decides to finish reading her news on time, we'll kick off another edition of the newsroom. Until then, just before I leave, kudos, of course, shout out to the team, especially Manuel Onwoka and Precious Nnenna Okun, and of course to Tunde, my G, who's on the technical aspect, ensuring that those of you on Facebook and YouTube are able to watch this perfectly. Thank you very much to everyone, and of course every other member of the newsroom. On behalf of the team, Ufuoma Egbamuno is my name. We have a special report for you that has to do with, of course, last week's NSAS Remembrance Day, October 20, 2020. Stay tuned at 7 o'clock. You'll get to hear that.
Nigeria Info will be right back.